For centuries, the identity of the Fulani people has sparked debate across Africa, mysterious, familiar, and misunderstood. Now look at this man. High cheekbones, copper brown skin, a herding staff in his hand, cattle behind him. You've seen this image before. The nomad, the herdsman, the wanderer. That's the only picture they ever show you. But do you really know who he is? But I need you to forget everything you think you know about the Fulani. Because what if I told you this simple herdsman could recite poetry in 4 languages? That his ancestors built scholarly communities when parts of Europe were struggling to recover from the collapse of Rome? That his people spread across 18 countries, speaking one of Africa's most widespread languages while preserving a shared identity for 1,000 years? This isn't a tribal footnote. This is a civilization. This is the story of the Fulbe, the Pulo, the Fula, the Fulani. And you are not ready for the truth. Let's start with the mystery. Where did they come from? In Senegal, in Gambia, in Guinea, they say the Fulani emerged from the Senegal River Valley. Some oral traditions speak of journeys from the Nile Valley. Some connect them to ancient Saharan pastoralists who lived in a greener Sahara thousands of years ago. Colonial anthropologists took one look at their features: lighter skin on average, straighter hair in some groups, narrow noses, and invented wild theories. Phoenicians, Egyptians, lost Mediterranean tribes, anything but African. But the DNA doesn't lie. Modern genetic studies show the Fulani have a primarily West African origin, with smaller contributions from North African and Saharan populations, exactly what you'd expect from people living along ancient trade routes and migration corridors for millennia. Their distinct look? That's not foreignness. That's history. That's the genetic conversation between West Africa, the Sahel, and the Sahara, shaped by climate, movement, adaptation, and time. They weren't outsiders. They were home. Now here's the part historians still marvel at. The Fulani spread across Africa, 6,000 kilometers from the Atlantic to Sudan over several centuries, from Senegal to Mali to Nigeria to Cameroon to Chad to Sudan. And they did something extraordinary. They kept their identity. Walk into a Fulani community in northern Nigeria, and then travel 4,000 kilometers west to Senegal. Different countries, different histories, different borders forced by Europeans. But the language? Recognizably the same. The customs, familiar. The cattle breeds, similar. The social code, pulaku, intact. This shouldn't be possible. Languages drift, cultures split, identities fragment. But the Fulani moved with purpose, with seasons, with cattle, with memory. And those cattle? Not just animals, walking banks, status symbols, and genetic treasures. Their humped zebu cattle are among the most drought-resistant breeds on Earth, shaped by an ancient breeding tradition many researchers consider one of the most refined in pre-colonial Africa. As they moved, they became the Sahel's information network. Before telephones, before railways, before borders. Who carried news from Timbuktu to Kano? Who linked the Berber traders of the Sahara to the farmers of the savannah? The Fulani. They didn't just move, they connected. But pastoralists didn't remain pastoralists. Some Fulani groups settled, built towns, built intellectual communities called majlis, where herders debated astronomy, law, theology, and philosophy. And then came one of the most dramatic chapters in African history, Usman Dan Fodio. Born in 1754 in Gobier, northern Nigeria, a Fulani Muslim scholar, thin, ascetic, brilliant. He looked at the Hausa kingdoms and saw rulers who mixed belief with exploitation, who taxed the poor, who practiced slavery without restraint. He preached reform. The rulers tried to silence him. Bad idea. In 1804, he declared a jihad, an Islamic reform movement that spread like wildfire. Fulani communities, long discriminated against by Hausa elites, rose up. And they won. In less than 20 years, Fulani-led forces overthrew multiple Hausa kingdoms and built the Sokoto Caliphate, one of the largest states in African history. This was not a band of nomads. This was a highly organized system with courts of law, taxation records, appointed governors, a vast manuscript tradition, and scholars producing thousands of pages of legal and philosophical writing. And Danfodio wasn't the only mind behind it. His daughter, Nana Asma'u, was a poet, scholar, educator, and political leader who organized networks of women teachers across the empire, one of the earliest large-scale female intellectual movements in West Africa. And outside Nigeria, other Fulani-led reform states arose: Futa Toro in Senegal, Futa Jallon in Guinea, Machina in Mali. Pastoralists became empire builders, nomads became administrators, scholars became revolutionaries. So how did all of that become herdsmen? 2 words: colonial lens. When the British defeated the Sokoto Caliphate in 1903, they needed a narrative. They couldn't portray the civilization they'd conquered as sophisticated. That would undermine the justification for colonial rule. So they froze the image, kept the cattle, erased the empire. Fulani rulers who once presided over massive territories were categorized in colonial reports as nomadic tribesmen. The manuscripts? Shelved and ignored. The cities? Reframed as native settlements. The legal system? Replaced or dismissed. A simplified identity replaced a 1,000-year civilization, and the world believed it. But the essence of Fulani life survived, centered in one word: pulaku, Fulaniness, a moral code built on semtende, modesty, self-control, munyal, patience, endurance, hakilo, wisdom, foresight. Some Fulani communities test endurance through the shahro ceremony, where boys withstand whippings without flinching. In Wadabe communities, the Gere Wall Festival celebrates male beauty, with men painting their faces and competing in elaborate dances for the attention of women. These traditions aren't relics. They're living expressions of identity, fluid, debated, evolving, but rooted in centuries of memory. And now, the hard part. Today, when conflict erupts in the Sahel, the headlines always say the same thing: Fulani herdsmen versus farmers. But that framing hides the truth. What's happening is the collision of climate change, shrinking grazing lands, population pressures, weak states, armed groups exploiting tensions, and communities, both farming and herding, being pushed to the edge. Fulani communities face violence and displacement. Farmer communities face loss of land and security. Everyone is suffering, while extremist groups fuel the fire. This is the cost of misunderstanding history, reducing complex people to a stereotype. So, who are the Fulani? They're pastoralists and scholars, nomads and empire builders, a people whose migrations reshaped West Africa, a civilization with law systems, manuscripts, poetry, and statecraft, a culture bound by identity more than borders. They're one of Africa's great stories, hidden in plain sight, not because they were invisible, but because we were taught not to see. Look again, because when you finally understand the Fulani, you begin to understand the history of the Sahel and the complexity of Africa itself.